Welcome to the Ink Mages podcast. We're so glad you've joined us. We have a special guest returning to the Ink Mages today. So we're super excited to have Justin Rose back with us. He hails from northern Wisconsin and he writes high fantasy, adventure with themes of guilt, forgiveness, responsibility, innocence versus knowledge, and the weight of living as mortal beings. When he's not writing his own work, he also curates the Midwest Fantasy Sampler, which is an anthology series featuring and promoting Midwestern authors, which is really cool. He also bums about in coffee shops and sells his books at Comic-Cons, Ren Fairs, book festivals, and crafts fairs all across the Midwest. So let's invite Justin back up to the show.
Hey, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you back. You're just such a fun guest to have, and you've been a fun author for us just to know. Glad to have you on the show. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so my name is Justin. I've been writing for about 9-10 years now, but I really only started doing stuff with it properly in the last about 3 years. And in the last 3 years, I've learned a lot doing like different in-person events, selling at Comic-Cons, book festivals, that sort of stuff. And early last year, I kind of had the idea of, I'm meeting all these fascinating other authors, and it's so lovely to kind of build networks and stuff. But writing is a very solitary pursuit, and it would be nice to have something collaborative that I could do with these other authors and ways to like share our talents and our resources and invest in each other. A rising tide raises all ships, as the saying goes.
Yes.
And so I came up with the idea for this regional anthology, the Midwest Fantasy Sampler. And I wanted to hook for it something to make it more than just a collection of stories. So I figured, well, whenever I want to read a new series, I'm always a little leery of the huge commitment of reading a full novel or a full series. And it would be really nice to have a sampling, a way to like figure out who I'm going to like. So my hook for the sampling platter, or for the Midwest Fantasy Sampler, is 10 stories, 10 authors. Every one of the short stories ties into a different series. So you read the stories, find the ones you like, and then there's QR codes and links so you can follow up on what you enjoy. And I thought it was a worthwhile project then that really gives a benefit to the audience in that they have all these things they can follow up on. It gives a benefit to the contributors in that every book out there is essentially a mini advertisement for their work existing in the world. So it's been a lot of fun to work on, and that's kind of what's been occupying a lot of my focus lately.
I love that. And I think all boats float. And I love that that's your mentality, because I think sometimes we get into the world, especially when we're going into marketing as authors, that we're in competition with each other, when really the more we support each other, there really is room at the table for all of us and all of our amazing books. And I love the idea of this, that it's kind of giving people an idea before they jump into a series. So they are getting a sampler, if you will, of all of these different artists. So tell us a little bit, so was it just all at the Ren Fairs and the conventions, just people that you had already met that are in your area? Like, give us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So I did one anthology for 2025. It's this one here. It's called Wonders and Dragons.
Yes.
And this one is pretty much all authors who I knew personally. There's 2 authors in there, I think, who I found online who I did not already know, who I found through like posting in Facebook groups like IFA author group and such. But the rest were all people I already knew. And I wanted to invite people who I thought would be interesting, who I knew I'd be able to get on board, and kind of treat it as somewhat of a trial run to see how it would work,
Smart.
And it worked really well. The book gets really great responses when I'm selling it in person, and it gains a lot of interest. And I've numerous times had to send out replacement shipments to authors who have sold out of it and stuff. So it's done well, and that told me it would work. So this year, with the one coming out in 2026, I've been a lot more intentional, gone a lot farther afield, started approaching a lot larger name authors, and seeing just how far I can take it. So I'm running a Kickstarter for the 2026 version. So it will have a lot of different bells and whistles, the standard foiling and sprayed edges and stuff, but also it'll be in full color, and there'll be like decorative elements on every page and stuff. So it's really a fun project. I was able to get a lot of authors who I didn't know if I'd be able to attract people of their caliber or not. I am still a fairly small fish in the pond. But one of the things I decided to do with it was every book would have 9 Midwestern authors per the original theme. but I'm also going to bring in one featured guest author just so I can have a little more liberty to pick one person who I'd really like to feature to bring in. And in 2026, we have JDL Russell, who is a really, really successful indie fantasy author. So I was super thrilled that he was interested in coming on board. He was actually the first person I talked to about being the featured author. So I got my first pick for that, and I can't wait for it to come out.
Well, I've gone and looked at the Kickstarter, and the foil, the sprayed edges, the cover looks fabulous, just gorgeous. And as for our indie authors, I know a lot of us really want our books to look beautiful. And I've had questions of where do you go if you want a sprayed edge version of a book? How do you get the foil lettering? So can you talk a little bit about how you researched that or who you went through to have such a beautiful book?
Yeah, so I did a Kickstarter for my own project a few early at the very start of this year. Or rather, the Kickstarter was end of last year, and then the book released the beginning of this year. And I used a company called Book Vault in the UK to do my special edition book. And it turned out really nice. The quality was beautiful as far as the production stuff goes, but it was extraordinarily expensive to do a small print run of those. Like really financially not a great viable route if I'm only doing a small number.
What's considered a small print run? Like 100?
So it was I think I did 80 or 90 copies roughly. I don't remember exactly, but it was somewhere I think just shy of 100. But it was like I don't mind just using an exact number here. It was about $20 per book on my end. So if the author is paying $20 per book, that means you're going to have to charge the reader an exorbitant amount in order to make it worth it. And you're going to have to spend a huge amount up front on the first shipment of books if you're doing a larger print run. So it just really wasn't, for my scale and stuff, wasn't the greatest route using Book Vault. So this one I'm doing next year, I'm doing through a company called Shunzong. And so it's a Chinese printer. They're interesting to work with because whereas places like KDP and Book Vault have like very simple to use, like generated templates and preview pages and stuff, this printer doesn't even have a website. I've talked to multiple authors who have used them before, and I've held books in my hands. Actually, I have
we get to see
another anthology that I was
I've seen this one
printed by them, and they did a really great job on the printing of this one. All the different elements look really great. So I know that they're a reputable company, but their only online presence is like, I can't remember, it's either like Alibaba or one of those like drop shipping companies that like pseudo hosts a website for. It's a very weird setup. So everything you do for like formatting and stuff, you do speaking directly to a sales rep over email. So it's a little different of a process and a little more time consuming and weird, but moving forward, it should be much more doable to offer reasonable prices for the special editions and to be able to turn a decent enough profit to, you know, there's 10 authors taking part. I'm trying to split it right down the middle, 10% every person, regardless of, you know, what role they take in the anthology. And so finding this better print option was a way to kind of make that worthwhile.
Oh, I love that. That was one thing I was curious, partnering with these other authors, like how does it get divvied up and split up and everything like that. And I'm sure they're all ready to participate on the Kickstarter. Tell us a little bit about the Kickstarter.
Yeah, so it's, I have a designer named Chiara Lorenzen. I'm probably butchering their name, but who is doing a number of like 4 sets of illustrations for the interior, where it'll be like a chapter header, scene divider, and then page frame. And so it'll be 4 different styles that each kind of match the vibe of the books. We got classic epic fantasy, we got romantasy, we got grimdark, we got some like flintlock, pre-industrial stuff. So because I got the different vibes of stories, I have the 4 different styles of that. And those are all kind of just basic line ink drawings with then some splashes of color. And then I will have 4 full-page illustrations by John Molinaro, an Instagram user named Marichka Art. I'm not sure of her name, but she's a Ukrainian artist. And yeah, so I'll have those artists doing the interior, and then the exterior cover, the main image of the woman in the library that you saw, which is, I think, the prettiest illustration I've ever commissioned. I adore that cover. That's also done by John Molinaro. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I want all of those who are listening to please hop over to that Kickstarter campaign. Please join the campaign and look at the beautiful detail that's going to be a part of this anthology sampler, just to be able to get ahead of the release and everything that is going to be happening with this book. It just does really look beautiful. So I'm really excited for you. I also wanted just to follow up with the Fall of Inkway and the audio drama that you did. Like, how has that been going? I mean, what an exciting project.
Well, so all of the responses I've ever gotten from it have been very positive. As far as the quality of it turned out, everything went really well with the project. I will say my ability to promote an audio product, it has definitely not gained as much interest as just my regular novels have. So it's been a little bit of a struggle to like kind of get eyes on it. But anytime there ever has been a review for it, or anytime like there have been a few YouTubers and stuff who have talked about it a little bit, who have like really like the response to it has been extraordinarily positive, just limited because I don't know how to get eyeballs on it super well. But yeah, it was super fun. Actually, last month, a really funny thing happened with that where I was doing a Ren Fair in Iowa, and I ran into one of the actresses from the audio drama. I think she's from California, and she was in Iowa visiting a friend, and they just went to the Ren Fair. And I was driving down to Iowa for this Ren Fair and just happened to run into this actress. And so I had her sign a bunch of my like printed scripts and stuff that I sell. And it was very fun to just have that weird happenstance. But
a little serendipitous moment.
Yeah.
Do you find that when you're selling the printed scripts that it then allows for people to like want to go check out the audiobook more? Or do you have people that specifically will just come and ask you, are your books on audio? And you're like, I have this really cool dramatized audio story.
Yeah, both. At in-person events, it is nice having the audio because, you know, a lot of the standardized questions you ask people, you know, do you read? Do you like fantasy? Whatever. And one of the responses you get is, well, I prefer audio. Yeah. And it is nice to have an audio thing there to pitch them. Also, I usually, when I sell the printed version of the scripts, which when I say printed scripts, I mean, it's like a novel, but, you know, it's like a regular printed novel, but laid out as a play script. I usually sell them, or rather add on a digital download of the audio with it. So they'll take a QR code with one-time use. And then, so usually I'm selling the audio in person as well.
Awesome.
Do you think that's something you'll ever do again with any of your other series or books, the audio drama?
Possibly, but not for a while. So it was very, very enjoyable to do. And I'm really glad I did it because it was a dream literally since I was a little kid. Audio dramas have always been like something I adore. I grew up on, you know, X-1, Suspense, Escape, Inner Sanctum, Lights Out, all of those like old like mystery and horror and suspense stories. I adored those on the radio. But it was very expensive to put together, and it was very, very time consuming. And so I think I need to increase my platform size a bit before I return to that medium, just because right now it is not worth the investment, but it is super, super enjoyable. And I'm very glad I did it once. So I have an idea for a sequel. So maybe someday I'll get back to it.
Ooh, that's exciting. Well, and I think, you know, what I always like to encourage authors too is like, once you have something done, especially if the traction isn't there at the beginning, it doesn't mean that it won't get traction. So just being able to have it out there and the momentum and the continuing, just you as an author having all of these things that you're doing is really going to open the door for more of that. And I love that project. I thought that's how I met you, was through Kickstarter and that initial project. So it was inspiring. It's one of those things that I would love to be able to do something like that at some point for some of my books. So tell us a little bit about The Hammer of Gath. You were telling us a little bit about some potentials for that story.
Yeah, so I'll start with this. The anthology that I'm working on currently, the Magic and Majesty anthology, every person contributes a short story that ties into one of their series. And the series that I'm doing for mine is my Nation's End series, which Hammer of Gath is the first book in. And I wrote Hammer of Gath about 8 years ago at this point. It was only the second novel I wrote, so it was a while back. But I've kind of had a lot of elements of that story kind of mulling around in my mind while I was working on the audio drama. And after I finished the audio drama, I decided to turn Hammer of Gath into a series. And I have been working on that now for, probably a year and a half now.
Wow.
But I realized after a while working on it that what I initially bit off was just too much to work on as one novel. So I've since split it into multiple sequels. And so now I have 2.5, like, mostly written books instead of working on one project. And so when that starts releasing in 2026, I'll be able to do a fairly quick release of several sequels to Hammer of Gath. And the idea for that story was I wrote Hammer of Gath wanting to tell a war story where there were no hard and fast lines between good and evil, because, you know, it's motivated by politics or by mutual prejudice rather than just prejudice of one side. And I wanted to make sure that the reader had people to empathize with and be invested in on both sides. So you could really see the toll that war takes both on the good guys and the bad guys, because in real life there's very rarely a clean line that way in an international conflict. And so I did that a bit in the first book. In Hammer of Gath, it follows mostly the Minotaurs, but there's also a few point of view characters on the elven side that are very worthwhile that you get invested in. But I wanted to make the split more definite. I wanted to give the elves more of a perspective. So the first book, the main character is this Minotaur who starts off as this young blacksmith's apprentice, kind of a very, very low on the totem pole person in his tribe in this loose democratic confederacy. But as the war starts and he has a lot of personal stake in it and he starts rising in prominence, he gradually unites all these democratic states and becomes a god king in essence.
Wow.
So the primary protagonist by the end of the first book is kind of a tyrant. You're also very invested in him. You're very interested because you understand why he makes all the choices he makes, and he has real reasons for seeing the weakness that the loose confederated democracy set up, the way it crippled their ability to fight in the war. And so he had definite reasons for everything he did, but he also essentially destroyed a centuries-old nation in the process of doing this. And so it's, you don't really know whether you're on his side or not. The second book follows an elf, and it's split into 4 timelines where you just look at different periods of his life. You see him as a child, you see him as a young man, you see him in his first campaign as a soldier in the elven army in this kind of like kind of civil war that's going on in their empire. And then you see him during the war with the Minotaurs, which is kind of the main timeline you follow. And it's very much a personal portrait. There's a lot more romantic elements than there usually are in my story. And you see him as a child, and he grows up abused. He's kind of autistic, it's hinted at. So he has a lot of mental struggles that doesn't quite connect with the other members of his tribe. And he grows up as an outcast, and his parents are highly abusive and toxic. And then you see him become a soldier and finally find something that he kind of excels at. And slowly over the course of the novel, his character is changing, and he shifts from this outcast to somebody who's actually prominent and important in his tribe without him ever really realizing it's happening. And it's a deeply like personal story where it's all focused on this one character. And so the goal there is really to increase the emotional investment readers have for the elven side, which they already had for the Minotaur side from the first book. So it's been a lot of fun to work on. It's very different from what I've written before in a lot of its themes and in a lot of the types of scenes it deals with and stuff. It's been really interesting.
It sounds fascinating, and I love the character arcs for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that it's Minotaurs, because normally we think of conflicts with elves, it's going to be dwarves or it's going to be humans. So the fact that it's Minotaurs is I'm already thinking of a different fantasy setting than a typical high fantasy. But wow, that sounds fascinating. And I have your book, The Hammer of Gath.
Yeah, I think you won it in a drawing.
I did a newsletter giveaway. So this makes me want to eat it up now. So, but you're saying that you're currently working on dividing what you've already written into more books, or like you've divided up that first book?
So the first book is finished. It is what it is. Like, it's a
Okay.
completed project. But I started working on a sequel that I had, that it's different from what I just described, because the sequel I had
Okay.
initially envisioned took place 6 years after the end of Hammer of Gath. It focused on a couple of characters from the first book, an elven woman named Thessalia and a minotaur named Wyron. They were kind of going to be the two main protagonists of this sequel. And I wrote about 130,000 words into it. And I realized this is about a quarter of what I need. So this is not going to work as a book.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, which of these characters can I kind of split off into their own sequel and make their story a sequel, and then kind of trim down what I actually need in this book? And so I selected this one character named Lane Hamarad, who is my protagonist I was describing earlier. And I've taken his portion of that book and added on a whole lot that happens in the time between Hammer of Gath and the planned sequel. And I've turned all that into my second book. So the second book is all about Lane Hamarad. And then the third book will be returning to that partial draft I had and kind of wrestling that into one narrative.
That is cool. I love that, like, stories evolve and we have to reshape them. What we're thinking as we're drafting them ends up changing, and we have to step back and take a look at, maybe I do need to write more. Maybe I'm going to turn this more into like chronicles, and you're highlighting different characters in each book. So I love that it's not set in stone. I think as authors, we need to tell ourselves that you can change the trajectory if you need to, that benefits the story.
The way you describe your stories, the gods, the different races, like you said, like even kind of the political, gray lines that we all sometimes justify. I just like that big world build, and the fact that just talking to you, hearing about your stories, it's obvious that there's a depth and there's lots of layers, which I love about world building and storytelling, is that there's so much to know and so much to tell about the worlds that you're building. I'm curious. Hopefully this isn't too much of a loaded question. Just where does your drive for storytelling come from? What's probably like the main themes and lines that really drive you when you're writing your stories?
Yes, that's a good question. There's a lot of different routes that I could probably take to answer it, kind of depending on how I'm feeling in the moment,
like
what's on my mind. Yeah. But I deal a lot with. So there's something that I was thinking about a month ago that I realized really comes up in my stories a lot, and that is the idea of yearning and of needing purpose and of needing something different. So like I'm a construction worker. Like during the day I work as a plumber, as a pipe fitter, and it's a good job. It supports me well. I have no complaints, but I don't like it. It doesn't move my soul and stir my passion, or anything. It doesn't fulfill me in any particular way, and stories do. Yeah. And I've realized so many of my stories are about people who are trapped in one setting, who dream of another, and kind of find ways either to escape where they're at and find the thing that fulfills them, or else find something where they're at that can fill that fulfillment. And I've realized that several of my characters fall into either of those camps. And so I'd say a theme that really does motivate me a lot is kind of like justifying existence. My main series is called First Immortals, and it's a story of a family who begin the series as kind of no ones in this frontier village. And at the end of the first book, through a series of stuff that all has to do with the plot of the book, they become immortal. And it is the first family of immortals in this world. And the next two novels are all about these people wrestling with justifying living that long, with trying to find a way to justify what they take from the world, because in order to exist, we consume, it's energy in, energy out. Like no matter what we do as human beings, our existence costs something. There is something we're taking from the world to exist, and it's larger for some people and smaller from others, but it's a necessity of living. And what do you do to justify that? What do you do to leave the world a little better after you leave? That's really the idea that's played with in First Immortals, which was the first series I worked on. And I think that is probably the deepest underlying message of my writing, is justifying your existence. In Hammer of Gath, I've described it before as the main message of that book is there's an idea of the world of 10,000 things, where everything in the world is united in a way and tied together and connected in a way that they are also distinct, but in their distinctness, they kind of exist as everything else. And in their unity, they exist only as themselves. It's not a particularly logical construction, but to lived experience, it's a very true construction, I feel like, where everything in the world is tied together in a way and shares value with each other. And so an injury to one thing is an injury to everything. And so I write the story Hammer of Gath and the full series Nation's End as a way to say, in every conflict, the damage you do to your opponent is also damage to yourself. There's loss no matter which side is losing.
That's deep.
So those are kind of some of the central tenets that I want to get across.
I love that. I love being able to ask that question and then hear that response, because it comes from a depth. That's where creativity really is. It comes, there's a connection in our spirit, in our souls that we're writing from a lot of the time that really connects with our audience and gives them a reason for wanting to read the story in the first place. And so I love that. I love that our viewers are getting to hear that about you, because I'm hoping that it inspires them to want to pick up one of your books. So what advice would you give to someone who is wanting to maybe do an anthology with other authors?
Find something that you can do to give it a hook, to set it apart. The thing I did was to make every story tied into a different series. So like you're reading the one anthology, but the one short story, you're going to finish that up, and then you might be able to go find D.E. Carlson's To Bind Fire series if you like romantasy. Or you might go find Remnant by K.R. Solberg, who I was actually an ARC reader in this book, and that was super fun. That's how I met her. Or if you like kind of darker epic fantasy, you might go and read one of R.M. Krogman's absolute chonkers in her Keepers of Midgate series. So that was my hook. So if you're looking to create an anthology, find some hook that sets it apart, or even it can be even something fairly loose, but it needs to be something you're able to capture quickly in words. So I saw a few very successful anthologies recently, actually just wrapped up in this last month. One was by Z.S. Diamante, who's a great author from Colorado. He's a really nice guy. He did this anthology called Honor, and the whole theme was every story tied into honor in some way. And when they did their marketing for it, they had all these authors doing videos together where one would be, hi, I'm so-and-so, hi, I'm so-and-so, hi, I'm so-and-so, and we are all for honor. And my goodness, that's just a really simple little hook, but it sure did work to keep engagement and interest in the marketing materials.
Yeah, it's short and memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it was a theme that could truly unify the writing, because they had sci-fi opera authors, they had hard sci-fi authors, they had epic fantasy, they had cozy fantasy, they had all these different flavors of speculative fiction, but there is a real unifying tie between them. It's not just an arbitrary thing slapped on, because they had this instructed theme that every story had to relate to. The other anthology I think that one hit like 65,000 on Kickstarter, so it did very, very well.
Wow.
The other one I saw was I think it was called The Book of Spores, and it was by another Wisconsin author, Greta Kelly, and their unifying theme was that every story is a spore that can like infiltrate somebody's mind and grow into something. And
wow, that's creepy, but yeah,
but like all of the artwork is all mushrooms and like networks of roots and stuff. And that one is pretty vague. I feel like you could slap that title onto just about any book of short stories and it kind of works, because that just describes short stories. But at the same time, it is something they were able to express. It is something that was able to unify all the artwork, that was able to tie everything together, and that Kickstarter did amazingly. I don't remember the numbers for that one, so I don't want to say it off the top of my head, but it was in the tens of thousands. I don't remember how much. So yeah, find a hook or something you're able to do, and then I would say be conscious of kind of where you're at as an author. So know what level of audience you're able to command, and that'll kind of dictate who you're able to approach or how generous you need to be with your terms. So for me, I'm like, well, I'm a pretty active author. You know, I'm at a lot of events. There are enough people who kind of know vaguely of me that I'm not an absolute no one. But at the same time, if you look at my social media numbers and stuff, I'm not big at all. I'm still a very small author. So I'm like, okay, I need to find a way to either only approach people who are kind of in my same general stratosphere, and then be very selective about who I pick, ones who I think have good quality writing. Or else, if I want to approach people who are a little larger than me, I probably need to be very generous with how much I'm paying, how much I'm offering, what the benefit is of taking part. So what I did was I set the terms for the Kickstarter as 10% across the board. And I am doing a lot of labor in this Kickstarter. You know, I'm putting in a lot of hours on the artwork and the design and putting the page together and promoting it and doing social media videos and everything. Like, there's a lot of labor that goes on in the background that I'm taking care of, and I'm not making any more than anybody else is off of it. So I'm like, I feel like, because I'm, and also, you know, when authors order author copies, it's at cost. There's no extra cost for any of the contributors. So I'm like, okay, I'm making these terms more generous than the anthologies that I've been part of before, because that way I can justify approaching somebody like JDL Russell or somebody who has a much larger audience than I do, and not feel like I'm insulting them by asking them to be part of my project, you know? That makes sense. So I would say, yeah, be conscious of kind of like where your own level is at, and kind of experiment to see what kind of interest you can garner with what you offer, and find a really good hook for making your story or your anthology stand out.
And would you say Kickstarter is the right way to go about these kind of projects?
Well, like, so my first one that I did in 2025 here, this one, I didn't do a Kickstarter for this one or anything. I just released it like I would have any one of my novels. And like I said, it was all with just people who I knew personally, kind of in a fairly local area. So it was not like, none of us commanded a huge enough audience to like get a really great jump on Kickstarter from it. Like, we probably could have done decently, but it didn't lend itself that way as well. And so I didn't do anything with it. I just treated it as a trial run. The one I'm doing now, I am hoping that the Kickstarter works really well for it, because I feel like with 10 people all promoting together, the possibility of bringing in an audience and doing well at the Kickstarter will be very high. It'll give me a very nice, well, it will give all the contributors a very nice product they can sell at in-person events and stuff. Just a nice thing to diversify the table. So I think it's a good option for this. But I would say it can go either way. It also depends what your interests are, what you're good at. I've only done one Kickstarter before, and it was for an audio project. And so it did okay, but it did not do great, because as I learned, Kickstarter is not the place for audio. I think Angela also learned this lesson.
I did.
Kickstarter is not where you go for audio. So I learned a lot about how to run a Kickstarter from that, but it only did okay because it wasn't the right fit for the platform. Moving forward, I want to do Kickstarter more, because it feels like a very beneficial route for getting an early amount of attention on your book. And the different mechanisms for making one successful make sense to me, and I understand. I'm not as good at the advertisement for a regular release yet. I feel like I will do better with Kickstarter. So that's why I'm going this route, because I just feel like I understand it more.
Right now, the Kickstarter is in pre-launch, and you said it's going to launch in March. Is a 3-month window like ideal to generate hype, or is like that, what would be too long of a window?
If anything, I would say I'm probably bordering on too long.
Okay.
I said it that way because I really wanted to make sure I was able to have all my ducks in a row, and I would be able to have printed test copies in hand
ahead of time.
So I said, so I set it that far out because I wanted to start getting rolling on the pre-launch stuff for it, but I also still wanted to make sure that I was going to have all the short stories in hand and able to get a test copy printed so that I have something to show by the time it launches. So I might be on the too long edge of things with the 3 months. But at the same time, though, Kickstarter changed not too long ago to the point where you can send updates to pre-launch followers rather than just after it launches. So that should actually help mitigate any issue with it being too long, because now once I start getting more artwork rolling in and stuff, I'll be able to send pre-launch updates to all the followers and keep them engaged and interested and mitigate the chance of them forgetting about it in the long window. So.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. Good advice to any of you who are thinking of doing a Kickstarter campaign. Kickstarter is a great way to not just launch a book, but to create fans. So It's definitely a good route to go, and it really does help you be seen in a whole different way. So thank you so much, Justin, for being on the Ink Mages again. We loved interviewing you. We love the books that you're writing and the projects you're working on. So it was definitely a pleasure to have you back on the show again. Let us know, where can people go to find out more information about you and your Kickstarter?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Facebook and fairly active on TikTok. On Facebook, it's Justin O. Rose. On TikTok, it's Justin Rose Author. Yeah, I'm pretty active on both of those. If you're interested in Kickstarter in particular, if you type in Magic and Majesty, a Midwest fantasy sampler, or really any large portion of that phrase into the Kickstarter search, you'll find it.
It's exciting. I'm excited for this. I'm definitely going to be jumping on. I want to be paying attention to this Kickstarter, and I love that it's a sampler so that I can really get into these different authors. So everybody, please go join his Kickstarter. Go check him out on social media. Please support his author journey. Again, thank you so much, Justin, for being on the Ink Mages.
Thank you. Thank you guys for talking. It's always lovely to hear from you guys.
Leave us a comment. Leave us a like. Let us know if you read any of Justin's books in the comments. That would be a fabulous way to also support him. And we'll see you next time.